Est-ce que l'on peut donner la...
Can we give the floor to Mr. Hammouni? Is Mr. Hammouni here? Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. Hello, Boualem. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this workshop. I thank also the KNES for this initiative to debate such an important subject, the governance of public companies. In my intervention, while listening to the speakers, I will try to not repeat what was said and go through the role of the directors in the public enterprise. I think it's the same in public sector and the private sector. And the publication that I will share will be in English, but for the debate, no issue, it could be in French.
Of corporate governance, why we are talking about corporate governance. In my view, the issue of corporate governance is not really different from the state-owned enterprises or the private companies. There are a number of reasons that would explain this. If you look at the last 10 years, 20 years, there's a lot of corporate failure. We can, for example of Enron, WorldCom, Palmarat. The financial crisis of 2008 has shown also a lot of corporate failures examples. And there are a number of reasons behind it. We talk about greed, especially when it comes to executive. Sometimes the issue of dealing with different stakeholders, alignment of interest, privatization also, because when we open the capital of a state-owned company and there are private sector players, sometimes we fail to align the interest, and then the board also has a certain responsibility in ensuring this alignment of interest and delivering on the mandate of the company. The state-owned enterprises are basically has maybe more responsibility when it comes to certain countries. And the idea of the nature of ownership, let's say private versus government, may lead to see that in the private companies we have a better governance, better performance, more profitability, as opposed to state-owned enterprises. Maybe the stereotype is to say that well, it's mismanaged, inefficiencies, and other issues, and of course the lack of profitability. And then in many instances we would talk about privatization in order to improve the management of the state-owned enterprises. But let me just in the next slide talk about the importance of state-owned enterprises. According to Forbes Global Index 2017, out of 2,000 big companies in the world, there are 282 state-owned enterprises. And by the way, this is at that time was considered as a big number. It grew throughout the last years, and it shows how important are these state-owned companies. And we can find big companies in China, talking about BTC countries, talking about our country, where Europe also, where the state-owned enterprises are considered as strategic companies. And indeed they are, because at the end of the day they have a double mandate. They are somehow the instrument that the government has between hands in order to achieve national economic development. And in the same time, this objective of stay profitable, because I heard my colleague, the speaker before me, talking about, for example, value creation, and maybe it can be considered as we are having a social mandate, and because of this social mandate, we will forego the profitability, which is actually which is not the case, because we should, or the state-owned enterprise should achieve these two objectives. The state-owned enterprise, as strategic players in the country, they have also other role. They contribute to the national economy. They also defend the general interest of the country, social justice, fairness, welfare, and they have also to manage the strategic resources of the country. We have seen many examples also where the state-owned enterprise can be a very important player in preventing also private monopolies, where we see, for example, the user, the end user, or the citizen will be the victim of this kind of monopolies. And at the end of the day, the question will be, how would the state-owned enterprise, which has so big role and mandate, and pursuing this double mandate, will be able to do it? And of course, the most important, it will be the board. In the board, the director will play a critical role, regardless of the model, because here we can see, for example, say we are used, for example, Nigeria, SGP, Strategic Gestion, Holdings, or Conseil de Participation. If you look at the MENA region, you will find different models, whether centralized, decentralized. But I think most importantly is, regardless of the model, how would a board, I would say, deliver the mandate assigned to him, and at the same time, how would the director would be effective in this board? And there is no difference, in my view, when it comes to good governance, whether it is in the state-owned enterprise as a director or in a private big company. I will skip the definition of the role of the board, because I think my colleague has spoken about it. Also, I think the audience knows very much. But there is two key words I would like to emphasize on it, and then we'll keep the other slides, is the entrepreneurial leadership. And here there are two key words, entrepreneurial and leadership. They usually in the board, there always somehow some overlap, at least for certain, especially when it comes to state-owned enterprises, between the corporate governance and the corporate management. And it is important to separate between these two. There is a role of corporate governance at the level of the board. There is a strategic management, and then there is a corporate management, which is at the level of the management. And there are a number of roles that are assumed by the board: accountability, supervision, and when it comes to the company, the management, so there is the execution of this of the strategy that will be put by the board. So some differences, if you want to say, the board is here to direct, gouverner, and the company, the management, here to manage. So when it comes to directing, there is a collective decision making. It's not individual. It's not one person will dictate kind of a vision. It's a collective decision making. When it comes to managing, it's an individual decision making, because the CEO has the responsibility of implementing what has been decided in the board. Duties and responsibilities to share to the shareholders, the owners of the company. In the case of state-owned enterprise, the government, and for the managing, they report to the board. If it is a CFO, for instance, or a CIO, this has a specific responsibility when it comes to the implementation or part of the implementation of the strategy. Leadership vision from the board, and also setting the strategy. Leadership from the management when it comes to implementation of this vision and strategy. The management should abide to the code of ethics. The board abide to the code of ethics, but also approve it, and if needed, always come to the changes needed in order to make sure that the code of ethics is there to make sure that the board is effectively working, and in the same time that the management is abiding to the code of ethics. And you will see examples during the presentation how this has an impact on the overall performance of the company. I will move to the next slide, where I will summarize the most important role of the board of directors, which are, I would say, 4 quadrants: exercising accountability and responsibility, foresight, delegation to management, and strategy and structure. The role of the director within the board is duty of loyalty, duty of care, and this is very important, the duty of care, because in many instances the director, when it comes of duty of care, it is taken lightly, but this is very, very important. Also should make clear there are no conflict of interest, make sure that there is an enough adequacy of control environment, disclosure when it comes to sharing information, when it comes to disclosing whether to the regulator, to the public. We, in certain instances, state-owned enterprises are private and sometimes are listed. And the more transparency, the more disclosure there, the better, even for the reputation of the state-owned enterprise, especially for the state-owned enterprise. We're talking also about stakeholders. We take, for example, water companies, energy companies, the end users will always be criticizing or having a feedback on the state-owned companies. So any decision that is taken by the board will be clearly seen in the public, and even can create crisis in the media. That's why it is very important to make sure that proper disclosure communication also is there. If we talk about just an example to get in the GCC, the GCC are the countries mainly in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, etc. There is a survey has been undertaken, and just to try to see what are the main tasks that have been taken by or conducted by the board, and is there some specific tasks that usually the board are doing and forgetting the other tasks, in the quadrant that I mentioned. And the survey shows that basically directors spend 50% of the board time on setting the purpose, the vision, the values, and setting strategy, more on the foresight, the perspective. And this survey, 72% of the respondents felt that they needed to spend significantly more time on determining purpose, vision, and values, and setting strategy issues. The survey shows also that the directors spent 22% of the board's time on exercises accountability, and 25% of the respondents of the survey felt that they needed to spend significantly more time on this activity. I think the most important from this survey, which shows that there should be a balance between the different functions, because one of the issues that we see, if you are sitting too much time in setting the strategy, the vision, and we don't really spend time as director on the accountability and the control, what will happen? So many things we can miss, or we can oversight, and then at the end of the day, the company will be at danger. There should be a certain level of balance, especially when it comes also to state-owned enterprises. What we know, we need to set the strategy for the next 5 years, or 3 years, or 4 years, but there should be also a certain level of accountability and control to be assumed. So what kind of board we usually see? If we can summarize them like passive, certifying, engaging, intervening, operating, and paper. Well, in a nutshell, you will find different kind of boards. you can find the board very passive. You composed of different board directors. They attend the board. They don't even speak. They don't challenge. And then you can find a board who is more consensual. It doesn't like to challenge, make sure that all the decision is done in a very consensus way, and then just basically be in a stalemate situation, and then avoid taking the right decision. We can also have a board very engaging, and this is what we basically would prefer, of course. Is there a criteria for the board size? Should we have 3, 2, or 8, or 7? Of course, there is always regulations when it comes to this. But what about the other experience? What about, for example, in the MENA region or other countries? How do they size the board, would say? Regardless of the size of the number, and I will come to certain examples, any board, whether it is 7 or 12 or 9, it's important that the board can hold productive, constructive discussions and make prompt, rational decisions, efficiently organize the work of the committees. As you heard from my other speakers, and you know that there will be committee of risk, committee of audit, executive committee, governance committee, compensation committee. There will be a number of committees. It is important that you should be enough administrators to hold all these committees independently, and in the same time to be productive enough so we can make also the right decisions. If you give examples of Saudi, in 2008, we're talking about the range between 2 and 12, depending on the different companies. And what we noticed, 33% of the listed companies had 2 directors from the same family, especially when it comes from family business. In Qatar, 76% of listed companies has 2 directors also from the same family. So the range between 4 and 12. In Tunisia, for the banking sector, they introduced regulation where they had all the banks should have 12 directors and 2 independent directors. But then we give the example: if we have the 12 directors, if basically we have independent directors, does it mean that we are ensuring a better governance? This slide shows you the major best practice. So most of the board, you will see 7 to 11 members. We have also independent component on it. We will have also some diversity when it comes to women in certain countries, and then I mentioned also the independent directors. So the different type of directors: you have the chairman, you have the CEO, the executive, non-executive, independent, nominee, alternate, and shadow. Well, you know all of that, but for the executive and non-executive is more. You find it in English-speaking countries, and then, well, basically, in most where you have the CFO or the CIO is also part of the member, and non-executive, they don't hold any responsibility in the company. But the shadow one, I would like to emphasize here on the shadow, especially when it comes to state-owned enterprises. A board member is nominated by a ministry to be, for example, represent the ministry in a mixed company or in a bank. The board member, some experiences, usually try to take the instructions from the ministry or the body appointing the board member. Also when we invest, I work for the Islamic Development Bank. We are investor in a number of companies and banks, and this issue has been always raised, and we discuss it. We are an investor. We take a participation in a bank. We appoint a board member in this company, and then the question will happen: does this board member should work for the interest of this company, or should always follow the instruction of the shareholder? And in many instances, the investor, the shareholder, can be, or the one appointed the board member can be the shadow director. And the board member should pay attention to this and avoid because about this kind of situation, or make sure that he's fulfilling his role of duty of care, and not only following the instructions coming from the body appointing him, because he has an individual responsibility when it comes to justice. If there is any failure, the board member is not covered by the law by saying we are receiving instruction. In certain instances, yes, of course, he can make the case and make sure that he is not, there is a shadow board member, but I think this is some problematic point that, especially when it comes to state-owned companies, to be taken into consideration. Well, I mean, I will skip this slide. I think the maybe covered because this was the difference between executive, non-executive directors. When it comes to independent directors, the qualification, I think maybe I'm not really aware whether this in Algeria is something that we practice, but if you introduce independent directors at the level of board, it will help, but provided that the independent director shouldn't be a recent employee, he shouldn't have any relationship with the company, shouldn't have received any current remuneration from the company, of course, except for the legal one, like the director's fees or share options, or etc. He shouldn't have any close ties or family ties with the company, and which is also valid for others, but non-cross directorship or significant links with other directors through involvement in other companies or bodies, and not a significant share owner, not a long-term board member as well. These are criteria to make sure if you are introducing an independent director, because we want really to bring diversity and we want to improve the way the board is operated to deliver on the objective. But if you are bringing someone who's sitting there for 10 years or 6, 7 years saying that he's an independent director, or maybe he's a significant share owner, or has other things, conflict of interest, that the purpose of having an independent director is defeated. And I will skip this slide, talking about the director selection appointment. I think also we skip it because I think it is covered by the idea, very simple. Whatever, before appointing an independent director, it's important to, as a board, to assess the gap. And when we assess the gap, we see what is the competence, what is the capability.
Sorry to interrupt you. Most of the points that you are making was already raised, and it's unfortunate that you are not with us this morning. If you may kindly request you to go to...
I will try to skip this. I think.
Yeah, go to the key elements, key semesters you want to extend. Thank you.
No. That's fine. No problem. But thank you for reminding me this. But I think I will skip this slide to go to the director's leadership attributes, and I think this is also important. And I'm not going to spend very much time on that. But I think leadership, which I mentioned in the definition of board membership, especially when it comes to taking strict position within the board, when it comes to challenging, when it comes to intervening, engaging, instead of being consensual. The behavioral part of the director is very important, and we've seen it in many board membership that I assumed many board membership, and also see through all my network. I see how difficult it is when it comes to take decision, because a board member is also remunerated, and sometimes there's always this question: should I really challenge a strong CEO? And in many instances, the CEO is the same time the chairman of the board, PDG, which is not separated. I think also has been covered, even though I didn't attend, but I'm sure my colleagues have covered this point, is to separate it. If you are facing a strong CEO or chairman, and then you know that this decision is not good for the company, but you are not really playing the right role as a director, because for whatever reason, then obviously you are not fulfilling your role. And in my last slide, I will speak about it. And for this, I will give an example. I'm here in this slide. I'm just mentioning I will describe a board of a company. this company has a really very complicated structure. The board members are 9, which is in line with all the best practice, right? The average age of board is 68. Is 68 years old. The number of new members the last 10 years, 3 only. Mean they have been together for a long time. The number of directors with financial literacy, minority. You can find a naval commander, a theater producer. We have 2 women. So when you see this, you say this is a very diversified board. We have independent board members. But we will see also that the chair of the board is the CEO and the chair of the risk and finance committee as well. And you see that the 2 members of the risk committee are all over 80. So this company is just Lehman Brothers that really basically went bankrupt in 2008. So despite all the on paper diversified board, etc., but it didn't ensure the good governance. And this is, we can see the same thing, we can see it in the state-owned companies. And I will give the example of this state-owned company. I cannot disclose the name. I was a board member in this company. It's a bank. It is owned 70% by the government. The number of board members are 12. The also number of people who understand banking and financial literacy is a really minority. 4% of the bank is owned by let's say 10% of the bank is owned by private sector, a big private sector of the country. All of them had a board membership, 4 of them. And there were also 2 independent directors. And what there would be a number of committees, and the remuneration committee would basically compose of the private sector. So the 4% or the 10% or the 4 board members who represent the private sector were those who basically appoint, select the independent directors, take the decision on the remuneration, etc. What happened created clusters in the board, and to the extent that we couldn't make a decision during the board because of the role of this influencing private sector. And in the representative of the state, they were always, kind of didn't have the right leadership to face all this big kind of private sector. And the board become clusters. And in many times, the board will stay for 10 hours, 12 hours, decisions are not taken. And there was a conflict within the management. And then this conflict has been reflected in the board. So this it shows that although this has 12, when you go to evaluate from on paper, there were 12 board members, 2 independent board members, kind of diversity, but still there was a problem. So the idea here is to make sure that the right diversity, not only diversity on paper, the right diversity is there. The right expertise, the right skill is there. Because there is no point only in meeting the requirements of the regulation, but there is an underlying importance on making it happen on the ground and working. So I think I will skip this as well because the moderator is maybe telling me that others also.
Yeah, you have 2 minutes more. Huh? After that, 2 minutes more. After that, I'm sorry because we are.
No problem. I would just. I think what I will do, I will give examples of big companies that have also had, since it is a comparison. Olympus, a Japanese company, in 2011 went bankrupt because of a governance issue. Also, HPU is a company that had problems because of the absence of an effective chief risk officer, absence of an effective whistleblowing policy. Madoff is a very famous example, a regulatory. It is important when it comes to state-owned. The board members did not play their roles. So my takeaway for the last 2 minutes is the following, and I will say it in French, and I've taken it for a colleague presentation. It's really very, very interesting, I think. For me, un administrateur, c'est très important ce rôle-là. C'est un homme ou une femme libre et disponible pour son rôle, libre dans ses convictions, jugement et position jusqu'à démissionner d'un mandat si cela lui paraît nécessaire. Et j'insiste sur ça. La dernière phrase, dans mon expérience, et la plupart des conseils d'administration, il y a toujours un problème éthique par rapport aux gains financiers personnels et par rapport au rôle que je dois jouer dans le conseil. Aussi, un administrateur doit faire preuve de vigilance, d'exigence, d'intégrité, de responsabilité, d'implication dans la conduite de ses missions, où il a une démarche pragmatique et prospective des situations spécifiques, spécialement quand il s'agit de gestion de crise. Et ça, que ce soit une entreprise publique, soit une entreprise privée, moi, c'est le même principe qui doit s'appliquer. Et le dernier point, je pense qu'il y a un takeaway à prendre, c'est un conseil, ce n'est pas une personne, ce n'est pas un administrateur, ce n'est pas un chairman, c'est au fait, selon l'Institut financier d'administrateurs, le conseil d'administration, c'est une équipe de rugby. Ça ne peut pas fonctionner en individuel. Pour créer du collectif, il faut travailler ensemble et pas en one-to-one. Et je pense que si on arrive à faire ça, parmi les recommandations, pourquoi ne pas créer un institut algérien d'administrateurs? Deuxièmement, donner l'opportunité à des expertises diverses de prendre des positions dans des conseils d'administration et mettre en œuvre tous les systèmes de contrôle. Et surtout, leadership est important. Je pense que le leadership et assumer le rôle avec intégrité, c'est très, très, très important dans n'importe quel conseil d'administration.
Merci beaucoup, Boualem.